This week, I have invited a dear friend of mine, Robert C. Wolcott. He is an expert of innovation, and you all must be wondering what that means. So let's bring him on the show and talk to him about what is that. Robert, welcome to our show.
Great to be here, Sanjiv. Thanks for the invite. And boy, if you can tell me what innovation is, I'd love to hear it.
So, Robert, I know you for several years, and you are teaching innovation and entrepreneurship for more than 2 decades, even at Kellogg School and even at UW, right?
Yeah, so Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern, and now at the Booth School of Business at the University of Chicago.
University of Chicago. Amazing, great. Both are amazing places, and we got phenomenal leaders from both of those institutions.
Sometimes things work out.
So, Robert, the biggest question I have for you today is, do you have a confession for our audience?
Oh, it's a little bit of a confession to say that I read a lot, but I read very few business books these days. Now, years ago, I read voraciously, whatever business book du jour, I would read it. I would figure out if I liked it or not. I would integrate it into my thinking. After a while, I realized that most of them were kind of saying the same stuff in different ways. And so very occasionally when I hear from people I respect, members of TWIN, the World Innovation Network, which is what that logo thing is there. When I hear about a book a few times from different people, I might pick it and say, okay, I guess I need to read that. But the honest truth is I read very few business books these days. I read more history, philosophy, and history and philosophy, I think, and some science are probably the best inputs to thinking about the far future, which I know is relevant for your show.
So next big question is, if I have to predict one thing, just one thing,
okay,
about our future, what will that be in 2050? So you and me arrive, we sit in a Elon Musk Venus, whatever the ship he's making for us,
right.
and we arrive in 2050. What will you predict?
Well, so I'm going to, rather than making a specific prediction, I'm going to make a grand prediction, maybe be a little megalomaniacal, but my colleague at Kellogg for many years, Dr. Moran Cerf, a neuroscientist, sometime later this century, certainly perhaps 2050, we will enter into what Moran and I call the post-virtual world. And what that means is, after we've entered the post-virtual world, you won't be able to tell experientially whether you're in a virtual environment or what we call default reality, which is many people call it the real world, right? You won't experientially be able to tell the difference between the real world and virtual worlds. And thus, now you might know you're in a virtual world, that's different. But experientially alone, you won't be able to tell the difference because it will be comprehensively experienced. The reason we'll be in a post-virtual world at that point is that no one will ask a stupid question like, should we meet in the virtual cafe or should we meet in the real cafe? Because there won't be a hard and fast distinction between those. It'll be more a dimensionality of experience. And so we won't be talking about the distinction between, oh, that's virtual and this is real. We will thus be post-virtual. And so a lot flows from this notion of post-virtual. And the science, neuroscience, cognitive science, and other things are looking, it's very clear to us, at least, that we will transition into that sometime, hopefully in my lifetime. I'd love to see what this means and how dramatically it changes our lives.
So I have a lot of questions for you so I'm studying this specific topic for last 3 years. And few things I realize. Number one, I find there is a lot of inequality in the society today.
Yeah.
And that inequality is increasing. What is the best way to bring it or reduce it? So one theory I have is through entrepreneurship, we can bring social equity because we can spread the wealth and let meritocracy rise. Now, how do you bring the entrepreneur and how you train the entrepreneurs of the future? Because if they're not thinking about innovation, they're not thinking about the future problems, there is no way we can create that next entrepreneurs or next level of entrepreneurs. So there are three key areas, in my opinion, we have to think through. And people like you can really help us and our audience think through these problems, because once we are able to clearly identify these problems, opportunities are there. Because it's always about defining a problem and is it worth
Great.
solving?
Great.
So number one, I believe, is food. And why food? Almost 2/3 of the land mass today, which is where we grow crops, is used for animal feed. We always talk about cutting more land, more forest, and creating more land, because we are going to add 3 more billion people. How are we going to feed? That's number one I see. Second problem I see is health, because that's really integral to us. We are living longer, which is great, but are we living healthier?
Right.
Or is it a life which we are somehow managing with pills and different things? Because what's the point of living if we are sick? And number three is more holistic, whether we call it sustainability or we call it the concept I want to coin on today's show is zero footprint cities. Because once we achieve that, the solar, transportation, all those things become part of it.
I'd like to go back out to the world in 2050, what you started us with, and bounce the food and agriculture, the sustainability questions in food and agriculture off of the post-virtual concept. So in the post-virtual world, remember what we're proposing is through invisible interfaces, direct brain machine interfaces, invisible interfaces, we will increasingly be able to provide data directly to our cognitive systems. And these data could be for experiential purposes, for different senses, sensory purposes, for other kinds of quantitative purposes, but whatever. We'll be able to make that connection directly. And so thus we'll have a comprehensive experience, a full embodied cognition of a reality that is, we would consider today, virtual. But now we're in a post-virtual world where we can have that comprehensive experience. So here's one example from the world of food. In the post-virtual world, we will be able to not have our cake and eat it too. Now think about this for a second. You will be able to have the complete experience of eating a piece of chocolate cake exactly like you had real chocolate cake. By the way, of course, you could make it very different than having real chocolate cake, but let's set that aside for now. You can have the complete comprehensive experience of having a piece of chocolate cake without ever having any chocolate cake enter your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's expand that implication. Right now, one of the things that my family and I love is ethnic foods from all over the world, different cuisines. I know you travel a lot, Sanjiv, as well. Anytime I'm traveling, I can't wait to have the local cuisine, to taste the flavors. In a post-virtual environment, all of that will be possible without sourcing all those ingredients and shipping them all over the world. Mm-hmm. All of that supply chain weight on sustainability will be able to, if we wanted to, go away. Now, we will still, if we have our physical bodies, and maybe that's a conversation for the year 2100, but
yes,
if we still have our physical bodies, like you said, we'll need nutrition. However, we'll be able to design exactly the vector and the content of nutrition necessary for Sanjiv to have his optimal health, and he can consume that and only that. And that will be decoupled from the experience of the cuisine. Now, we're not losing the experience of cuisine.
That's so important.
Right. That is essential to culture, to human beings, to a sense of meaning and belonging. And there's nothing better, in my opinion, than that kind of having a meal.
We were in Venice, and the kind of cuisine we tried, it was like that brought us together, which is interesting. The food brings all of us together.
It does. And here's the wrinkle. We will be able to have those experiences in the post-virtual world without the physical food products actually needing to come to us. Mm-hmm. Now, think about the supply chain implications. Think about the implications on sustainability when we don't have to spend, and not even in discussing the next 10 years as we have more and more factory produced meat without any living things in harm's way.
Yeah.
And that's already starting, as you know very well.
Yeah, I know. I'm an investor
So-
in some of those.
So I'm actually quite optimistic, very optimistic about, I'd say 20 to 30 years from now. I think we'll be in far better shape. I honestly am much more concerned about the next 20 years or so. I think the transition will probably be much harder than most people imagine.
So, Robert, fast forward. We are going to grow food in the factories. That's for sure. We are already growing. And the companies like Clara Food already making strides. Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat. I mean, phenomenal companies are in this space. Even people are working on producing milk, cheese, everything we can think of.
Yes.
Now, what that brings, and every single audience I'm talking to, they ask this question: how about nutrition value? Is the new kind of milk same as the milk we get from the cow? And on the same note, this factory farming for the meat, what will happen to that industry? Because that's a huge industry. Same as the fishing is a huge industry. We don't want people to starve. So it's very complex question, as we both know. Do you have some takes on that?
I do. I'm optimistic for a future where we do not have an ethical dilemma raising animals for consumption. And let me digress on that for a second. I'm a seafood vegetarian. I'm a pescatarian. If I were rigorous, I would be a full vegetarian. Maybe one day I will be. But honestly, Sanjiv, what you brought up before is the number one reason why I have not given up seafood. And that is, I love cuisines from all over the world. I particularly love Japanese and French cuisine. And yes, I know there are phenomenal vegetarian options these days, but you talk to a real French chef, they'll tell you to eat before you show up if you're a vegan. You still can't access some of that. And I decided to compromise a little bit to continue to have that experience in my life. In terms of the industries will, for a little while, not notice much impact. They're starting to get active and becoming engaged. They're making investments. They're trying to figure out how to navigate, and it is very difficult. Tyson, for instance, has been investing in alternative proteins for some time, but they're going to have a long, hard slog, and there's going to be, for a while, it's going to be very slow, and there isn't going to be a lot of direct impact, just a little, but at some point in the not too distant future, we'll start to see a rapid acceleration in the impact. And the scale of demand, though, is rising at the same time. So like I say, it's going to take a very long time, and the impact will be relatively modest. But eventually, the economics and the efficiency of production of meat or other food products in factories in what's called controlled environment agriculture, the economics of controlled environment agriculture will become so much better in not all, but in many parts of the world, that it just makes business sense.
Robert, I have a lot of questions, but we have few more minutes left in our shows. So let's talk about innovation and entrepreneurship.
Okay.
For last 2 decades, you have talked about it extensively. So can you talk or share a little bit about the innovation framework you think a future entrepreneur should adopt, or you have some guidelines for that for our audience?
Wow. Well, there are a lot of frameworks, so I'm probably not going to go there. If anyone's interested in connecting about, I think the framework should match the problem. So what it is you're trying to achieve, what are your business objectives or your social objectives, or what are the whatever it is you're trying to achieve in the world. I think I'd make 2 points for any aspiring entrepreneurs and current entrepreneurs for that matter. One is, make sure you're working on the right questions. And one of the things that we do as humans is we converge on solutions too quickly. And we do it over and over again. Sanjiv, in my classes, sometimes I do this exercise where I ask my students, and my students are EMBA students, so they're between 30 and 55 years old, mid-career, very successful. And I do this little exercise where I give them a piece of paper. It has a challenge on it. And it says on the paper in all bold, underlined, do not come up with solutions, just come up with questions. Do not come up with solutions, okay? And I tell them that. I send them off to breakout rooms for 45 minutes. They come back, they start to share, and guess what they did?
They have the solution, not the problem.
Solutions, exactly, before they even understand the problem. And often if you go deeper and ask, like the Toyota production system tells you, ask 5 whys. Why do we want to do that? Why do we want to do that? Why do we want to do that? Eventually you start to get to what you're really trying to accomplish. The second point, which is actually related, is the notion of purpose. The purpose of why you work so hard. Why are you trying to do that? And we could talk for hours about it. We don't have time, but I'll make one observation. In a world where increasingly technology will be able to do anything, in a world where technology can increasingly do anything, the question for each of us is, what should we be doing and why? And that's the question of purpose.
Well, I don't need to even summarize today's conversation for our audience. You know, it's all about the purpose. Let's define the problem first before we get into the solution. Yes. Once we identify the problem, once we can analyze it and even see if this problem worth solving. Thank you so much, Robert, for your time today. It's really, really amazing what we have accomplished in the last 25 minutes. Do you have any parting thoughts for our audience?
Well, first of all, I think it's great that you're doing this. And I have to say, I love your cello and I love that t-shirt, Amplified Curiosity. That says so much about you, Sanjiv. Thanks so much for hosting the show and for having me.
Thank you, Robert.